Welcome back to Porcelain Peak, and as you can tell by the solo recording of me, one of our co-hosts is feeling under the weather. So instead of trying to power through an episode while one of us is ill, we're going to give you a sneak preview of what we're doing over for the Creep Cult on Patreon. Please enjoy our discussion on the first 3 Saw films, and for tone, John and Anthony, keep it creepy.
Hey, Creep Cult, welcome to your Patreon bonus episode.
It's been a while.
Of Porcelain Peak. Yes, it has been a while. Last week, sorry if you missed us, one of us was a little sick, so we did postpone instead of giving you shitty quality, because we want quality, not quantity, around here, right?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair.
Yeah, more or less.
I do apologize to everybody. I came down with the vid.
I wasn't gonna throw anybody under the bus.
I wasn't gonna throw anybody under the bus.
Yeah, but if you want to lay on that sword, man, it was this guy's fault. You didn't get your shit.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna send hate mail, send it to smalldickenergy at getalife.com.
Yes, if you want $1.25 back, let them know. Anyway, we are gonna get things rolling with our James Wanuary. Is that Happy New Year, I guess, right?
Yeah, so if you're a patron, you're getting an extra large James Wanuary this month, because you're not only going to get the regular episodes that we're doing, Dead Silence, Insidious 1 and 2, Megan at some point. I keep saying Megan in my head, because I think that's how James Wan would say it, because he's an Australian. Megan. And then, and then we're doing all the Saw movies in these bonus episodes, which I'm very excited about, because I've seen this franchise many times, and
I've seen the first few of them a lot.
Yeah,
and I've skipped ahead a bit, and so I've already been like, oh yeah, I remember this, and then I'm like, I think this is kind of where I stopped watching them regularly, because the first like 3 or 4 I watched it a lot.
Yeah.
But
back when Saw was
ridiculous.
I mean, they start ridiculous.
Well, I think a good way to start the conversation before we dive into the movie is, do you guys remember what your experience was like when this first Saw movie was coming out? Like, do you remember it being a big deal? Do you remember people talking about it? Because I remember everybody, it was one of those movies where it dropped and literally everybody was talking about how fucked up it was. And it was kind of my first experience with really a lot of people's first experience with now they call it torture porn, but the kind of extreme cinema that the French were very familiar with at this point, with the new French extremity and all that. But with this, a lot of people I think were kind of blown away by how fucked up Saw was, and obviously it spawned this whole genre in the United States with movies like Hostel and a bunch of other knockoff stuff like Saw.
And just Saw.
Then a million Saw movies, but
which is still happening.
Which I think makes it really surprising for a lot of people who maybe haven't thought about this franchise in a long time, or they've come in at later movies, to go back and watch this first one and see how simple and relatively low-key it is compared to all of the rest of the movies that come after it, where it was just like, okay, we got to get more traps and more craziness.
More gore.
Yeah.
My experience with it was my friend Jeff, the guy that does our intro song, he saw it, and we were walking somewhere, and he described the entire movie to me, like beat for beat, and I was like, that's fucking crazy,
I remember those days fondly of, Dominic. He used to always be the one who would go see the new movies and then describe them in detail, and I loved it, because I knew I was never going to see the movie until, at that time, it would be like a year later when the VHS or the DVD or whatever would come out. And so, I would just be like, hey, Dom, I'm not going to see this. So if I couldn't get the novelization and read it, I would have him explain. I remember for Spider-Man, he did that for me. For Bride of Chucky, he did that, because I especially couldn't go see rated R movies.
Yeah.
And then for Saw,
So, he described it to me, and then I was like, I got to see that. So then I went and watched it, and then I want to say every year after that, because it was like every year. For a while, for like 3 or 4 years.
If it's Halloween, it must be Saw.
A group of friends and I would go. Like, that was like our thing every Halloween, or sometimes it wouldn't be exactly on Halloween. We would go see it. And I think we did that with most of them. I don't know if we did that definitely didn't do it with the Jigsaw. And I don't think we did it with 7, with this 3D, right?
Yeah, definitely a franchise that went well past its expiration date in terms of like how interested people were. But
they made hell money.
Well, and it's interesting because I think it seems like there was a break in the 90s up until Saw, because in the 80s they used to do the same thing where there would be a new Nightmare on Elm Street every year or a new Friday the 13th every year, and that's why those movies got so terrible as they kept going. And that's why those franchises got like ridiculously extended, and then they kind of stopped that for a little bit. Like, yeah, we had several Scream movies, but they weren't all back to back to back to back. And then in the 2000s we started this trend again, and then we had this, and then Paranormal Activity did that for a few years.
It's cashing in. It's like everyone watching
Yellowstone. People are going to go,
spin-offs.
what do we want to do for Halloween or the Halloween season? Let's go see whatever horror movies in theaters. What about you, John?
For me, I have a similar experience to Anthony, where like it wasn't something that I ran out and watched immediately, but everybody was talking about it. Like, I wasn't as involved in the horror scene at that time. So if you want to go back and find out where that probably landed on my timeline, you can go back and listen to our like horror, like early, like our early life with horror episode. It's way back in the lexicon. But the experience that I had with it was mostly just like when it would come out, they'd eventually go to DVD or whatever, and then we'd rent them and watch them that way. And I always thought like, I don't know if I've seen anything this gory. And then you go back and you think about it and you watch it, you're like, this is pretty tame by comparison to some of the shit that we've watched recently.
Well, yeah, and then you look at movies like Terrifier that are just like...
you look at shows even now, like The Walking Dead is probably
Hannibal,
gorier than this shit is.
There's a lot of,
at least this first one,
way more fucked up stuff. But I don't even know how many years after these movies. I don't think I saw the first Saw until probably all of them, if not almost all of them, were out. Like that, because I also wasn't really in the horror scene outside of stuff I saw on TV and being terrified of like Tales from the Crypt and stuff. But like, I would see the posters, like those posters with like the teeth and the fingers and all that stuff, and just go, that looks fucking disgusting, and didn't really have a huge interest in like gross out. I had that same opinion that most of the negative critics had, which is like, this is just depravity.
The posters were all just like dirty bathroom posters.
Yeah, dirty. I love that dirty bathroom aesthetic.
Yeah, that's pretty much what they were. Dirty truck stop bathrooms.
But to give just a little bit of background, because the movie's not terribly complex or long, so we'll probably get through our thoughts on it pretty quick, but just a little bit of background because I think it's really interesting on this, especially with it being James Wan and Lee Winnell's first real venture together outside of the unobtainium that is Stygian.
Yeah.
We love I searched, he searched, nothing, dude. It just doesn't exist.
Apparently it had like one screening at a festival and then never had a physical media release or a digital release. But anyway, so James Wan and Lee Winnell met in Australia, where they're both from, at film school. They really wanted to make a movie over there. They based the idea on Saw around the concept that they were only going to be able to have the budget to do like a one-room movie. So like, let's write something around using one room. And then they basically just took a bunch of nightmares that they had both had between the two of them and took those ideas and shoved them in here and tried to make it into a thing. Winnell said that he had a bunch of hospital visits recently at that period in time for anxiety and migraines. And so he was getting a lot of scans done, and he was thinking a lot about his mortality, thinking like, worst case scenario, I have a brain tumor. And that kind of spawned the idea of the Jigsaw character and having cancer. So when they first started pitching it, nobody wanted to let James Wan direct because he had never directed anything. They were like, we like the idea, but we don't want you to direct. And so he and Winnell got some money together, and they filmed just the reverse bear trap scene with Winnell as the character, as a proof of concept with like all the, Saw styling in it and everything, and pitched it with that. And Evolution Entertainment over here in the United States was like, cool, we love it. And was like, come over here right now. And they came over, got $1 million to do the movie. It was going to go straight to DVD. It showed at Sundance. It went over incredibly well. So they released it theatrically. The movie ended up making over 80 times its budget. Something like, close to like $120 million on a $1 million budget. So obviously one of the most successful horror movies of all time. I think it's right up there with like Blair Witch Project and maybe Paranormal Activity. And kind of helped create the Blumhouse model, which is why it makes sense that James Wan and Jason Blum are in cahoots now, because they all kind of came out of that same model of like, let's make something super dirt cheap and make a shit ton of money on it. And the smart decision that Wan and Winnell made at the time was, we're not going to get paid up front. We're going to take percentage off the gross. And of course these movies made a shit ton of money. So they made a lot of money off of it, and it was hugely successful.
It basically turned Twisted Pictures into a household name overnight.
Because Twisted Pictures was the spin-off of Evolution Entertainment.
And Lionsgate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they were like, we need to make a horror division, and Twisted Pictures, was around for all the Saw stuff, and obviously became a huge franchise. Winnell was involved at least with the first two, or I think the first three with writing, and Juan directed the first one, and then was producer on all of them, and kind of also spawned his now long-standing production career as being a producer on horror projects. But
it's funny that for a guy who started two big-ass franchises off the rip, can't get a hand in the DC game. Can't make it happen, man.
Yeah,
but I just love stories like this where it's like two scrappy dudes at a film school who are like, we just want to make something cool, and we gotta, it's inspiring for someone like me who desperately wants to make a short film, and I'm like, I think I'm just gonna have to write something around, can I do this in one room, like in one location, and and we've talked about it before, limitations.
Exactly.
Yeah, limitations are part of what makes movies great, is when you can work around them. And when we get into the movie a little bit, I'll talk a little bit about some of the fun behind the scenes stuff about this movie and how fucking difficult it was for them to make, because they had no money.
Yeah, some of the limitations obviously were of a detriment to this film. One of them being that they didn't really have a budget to give to actors. So the fact that Winnell is a character in this is pretty rough. I mean, he remembers his lines. He does a decent enough job of keeping the plot moving forward, but you don't care about his character.
Yeah,
which is unfortunate.
And also, it's this Australian dude desperately trying to do an American accent. And his version of doing that is just like, well, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? Like, he's just constantly just like hyper and at 100. And then you have Carrie Elwes also trying to do an American accent, who is... I mean, I honestly was just kind of blown away in retrospect, thinking like, on $1 million budget, they have Carrie Elwes and Danny Glover in this movie.
Yeah,
and the guy that plays Jigsaw. I mean, kind of in the
Tobin
movie.
Bell.
Yeah,
Tobin Bell,
I don't know how big Tobin Bell was as a name until this franchise, because now everybody recognizes the Jigsaw voice, even if they don't know that it's Tobin Bell. I think most people think that the doll is the villain, is Jigsaw and is the villain of these, like if they've just seen the commercials. But even that, like, that's become an iconic horror movie thing, is Billy the Puppet, the doll.
This Billy the Puppet.
Yeah, this Billy the Puppet. And that was just made with paper towel rolls and paper mache, and James Wan like made it in his apartment for that first movie, and then that evolved into a whole mechanical puppet thing that they would use in the future ones. But filming the fact that there are no exterior shots in the first Saw movie. Anytime you see a car outside, they literally just put it in a garage and turned off the lights, and then put a fog machine in and ran lights by it to look like, so there's a car chase in this, like a short car chase that's all in the editing, and it's just cars being shaken around in a garage. All of the exterior shots are actually done in interiors, just with darkness around them to make it look like it's outside, because they just had the budget to basically rent out a warehouse and use the rooms for the bathroom and a couple other locations. And they also didn't shoot enough to make this like stretch out to runtime. So they had to go in, and that's where this classic Saw style of editing comes from, where it's the quick cuts and the craziness, is they just needed to pad out those scenes by inserting a bunch of quick cuts of the footage.
And that became iconic for this franchise.
Yeah, and all of the surveillance footage was just because they were like, oh shit, we didn't shoot what we needed to for this scene. So they would reshoot it, like, in poor quality basically, and we're like, we'll just use it as surveillance footage to get this exposition or whatever across. But I think overall the movie is still pretty damn impressive. Like, at the end of the day, it doesn't make a ton of sense when you really think about it. The line that always makes me laugh is the whole the through line of these movies. I mean, if you guys don't know anything about Saw, Jigsaw is a guy who has the cancer, and he feels that other people don't appreciate their lives. We find out in future movies all of the things that happened to him that made him get there. It's crazy, let me tell you.
We'll go on that journey together.
So he somehow has the means, as a decrepit cancer man, to build elaborate traps that he puts people in, and it's basically like, you gotta do some crazy shit to your body or someone else's body, and through this experience you'll learn to appreciate your life. So one of the famous examples from this movie is the reverse bear trap. He puts the Amanda character in it, and she is a drug addict. And he's like, you are a drug addict, and that's bad. And so I'm gonna make you not a drug addict. I'm gonna scare you straight, get you sober by putting your head in a reverse bear trap, which I guess in the original short film was a real working prop that Lee Winnell had to put on his head, like a real. They basically just took a bear trap and fucked with it.
Yeah.
So they had to be extra careful that it didn't, because he had to put it in his mouth, that it
My
didn't
God.
actually go off and kill him.
Jesus fucking Christ.
You do what you got to do to make the movie work.
Imagine that to film this short film that they fucking killed Lee Winnell before he got to make The Invisible
And
Man.
James Wan's just like, now I got no competition.
One down.
No more Aussies in film, baby. It's just me.
Yeah, but yeah, so they have this whole thing where it's like, well, Jigsaw's not really a murderer because he puts people in situations where they
Kill themselves.
almost always kill themselves. And I'm like, pretty sure the laws in most states would get him on manslaughter, 100 counts of manslaughter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because even if he didn't intend to kill these people, they done got sliced up.
Yeah, I put you in a trap full of razor wire. Good luck getting out.
And I also put poison in your bloodstream. It's like, that's enough, I think, for this guy to go to prison. So the first movie is basically we're split between the story of Carrie Elwes and Lee Winnell stuck in a bathroom together. There are a bunch of clues come out throughout.
Adam.
Yeah, Adam. They and Dr. Lawrence Gordon, right?
Yeah.
Larry Gordon.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're in the bathroom, and then we also have Danny Glover, who is obsessed with catching the Jigsaw killer. So he and his partner are searching for him, and that's where we get some of the more Seven style influences, which is something that's most people already know at this point, but James Wan has been very open about saying that Seven was a massive inspiration. Even the guy who does the music for this is Charlie Clouser, who's involved with Nine Inch Nails. And Fincher also worked with Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross from Nine Inch Nails. So there's a lot of shared DNA. And then the whole concept of the really fucked up kind of thematic traps is all very Seven.
Coloring, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. In this, it's just like, let's make everything hella green.
Yeah. And gritty.
Yeah, I think it's meant to just look disgusting. And I think that this movie was part of what kicked off just making your movie look disgusting.
Yeah, because then you got all those Platinum Dunes versions of the remakes, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm sure definitely got its aesthetic from this.
I found it endearing here, and it's so funny that I don't find any of it endearing when you look at Platinum Dunes as a whole. Like, it's the same style. It's just, it feels so gritty and low budget and guerrilla almost, the way that they made this film. And then you compare that to, like, over at Platinum Dunes, you're like, yeah, here, have all the money in the world to make the next big of X franchise. And they, like, purposefully made a movie that's meant to look shitty. And I'm like, it just doesn't have the same, doesn't carry the same weight.
Yeah. While maybe not as clever in its entirety as something like Seven, I do think that this movie is still pretty smart. I think I'm sure a lot of people had their minds fucking blown by the big twist at the end of this.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
movie with
That was what
Jigsaw.
everybody talked about, aside from the gore, was the twist ending.
A couple of twists. Like, Adam had the key with him the whole time. Motherfucker
Yeah, so
kicked it around.
Yeah, there's that whole thing. It's like right in the beginning, you see him in the bathtub, and the key that he had on him gets sucked down the drain, and then obviously that gets him fucked. There's a little stuff like when they pretty much reveal who the Jigsaw killer is toward the beginning, when Lawrence is with his like student doctors and they're talking about the patient, and Zepp comes by and he's like, oh, he's a real great guy, that patient. And I think it's in John Kramer's hand is the pen light that he ends up using to try to frame Gordon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there's little stuff like that. Just like all the little hints and things. I think overall it all ties together really nicely, at least in this first movie. And I really think if there hadn't been any sequels to this would have been a pretty good little standalone escape room. Also this kind of spawned the idea of escape rooms.
The whole time I was like, this is just an escape room. Yeah, it's like
it blows me
clues
away
and
that like
hints.
there's a Saw roller coaster in the UK apparently, but there have, as far as I know, never been any like Saw escape rooms. There have been houses at horror nights, but never like a Thaw themed escape room, a Saw themed escape room. And like it's right there. It's dirty bathroom escape room.
It's perfect.
You got to reach your hand into a fucking
Into
toilet.
some shit. Yeah, I mean, I thought that Cary Elwes had some good parts as far as his performance goes. I think when he's neutral, he's okay. When he's angry, he's pretty good. But when he's like sad, it's awful, dude. He's like, oh, my poor family. I was like, oh my god, like you're like a pretty well-known actor. Like this is rough, man.
Yeah,
and I was like, lost it for me.
I think that the weakest link in the whole movie is just the acting in general.
Yeah, Glover's not bad,
but I don't think we get enough like cool Predator 2 style Glover moments, like cool one-liners and stuff. He's very like one note in the movie, and while it's cool to see him, he like isn't doing anything extra special. We barely get to see Shawnee Smith as Amanda here. I think she does great in future movies.
Yeah.
But apparently the only reason she's in this is because when the casting agent asked Juan, like, who do you think would be good for this part? He just jokingly was like, well, I've always had a crush on Shawnee Smith, like since I was a kid. And then they called him like the next day and like, cool, she's in.
Oh shit.
Yeah. So that must have been kind of intimidating for him.
That's cool.
But yeah, I don't think that. Yeah, I mean, Lee Winnell's not an actor.
No.
Even though they insist on having him be in the Insidious movies and in this.
He has a lot of screen time, and he is half of what's trying to carry this movie, and it's not there.
Yeah, and I think that just comes from... You see in the second movie, then, they have this huge cast in the house, which we'll get into next week, but they have this huge cast of people, not all big-name people, but, I mean, I think the biggest name they have in that movie is probably Donnie Wahlberg, but... Yeah, it's just all... It's a much bigger cast, and in this you can just tell, like, they didn't have a lot of money, and most of that money probably went to Elwes and Glover. I just did Hereditary. That was weird. a glottal stop.
I also think a lot of this movie just doesn't make a ton of sense. I was just like, this makes no sense. Like the
pig,
all of Zepp's stuff doesn't make sense. Yeah. Like, why do the pig thing? Also, like, if you're a professional skis bag photographer, why the fuck is your flash out? Like, just little things where I'm like, that just doesn't make sense, and you should know better. And it's like, well, we're just doing it for the service of like that plot point, so like you can get a little hint of what's happening. It's like, yeah, but that doesn't make sense, man. And then like they've been hunting down this notorious murderer, and they don't call back. Like they fix that in part 2 where they have like this massive SWAT team, but in this one I was like, let's just go, me and you, man.
We'll just go right into the trap house.
Yeah. And then neither of them have like walkie-talkies or call for backup, and I'm just like,
we don't need a warrant.
Yeah, I was like, this is crazy, but I was like, all right, you gotta suspend some.
It's funny too because you just made me realize like maybe in this movie I think they get away with it just because it's two guys' first movie, and they were just kind of, I think, trying to get it made, and so maybe all of the ducks aren't in a row in terms of the logic of it, and that would have been fine if it had just been this movie. You kind of excuse it because the style is there and the idea is there, and the execution is mostly there in terms of like where it leads to, and just the whole thing, the whole idea. But then the sequels, it seems like they were like, okay, we got to double down and then triple down and then quadruple down on the convoluted plot that makes no sense with a million twists.
We have to reverse engineer literally all the weird shit we did in the first movie.
Yes, instead of going like, okay, so the first one was pretty rough and we should maybe make sure that everything's more airtight in the sequels. They're like, no, we're just going to keep doubling down on the shit that didn't make any sense and was crazy about that first one until to the point where if you're someone like me who... I just kind of sit back and laugh at how absolutely insane this franchise gets, and like every time there's a new crazy twist that makes no sense, I just get excited about the na 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 na, like the music popping up, and just like, oh, we're about to get a green tinted flashback to all the clues that are apparently leading up to why this person was also working for Jigsaw, and anyway, but I don't think the first one is incredible, but I do think it's impressive. And for a first movie, I mean, totally. I couldn't get anywhere close. So
yeah,
but yeah, those are pretty much my thoughts on the first Saw movie. I think I'll have a lot more to say as the movies get more complex and as the story progresses. But yeah, for the first one, it's probably technically the best of the franchise. But I would say I probably am a bigger fan of like 3, maybe. But we'll get to it and see if I still feel that way after I've rewatched it.
Yeah, we'll try to rank them up when we're done.
Have you seen all of them?
So I think I've seen all of them except for Jigsaw.
Same. I haven't seen.
So I've seen all 7, and then Book of Saw.
Right. Forgot about that. And you've seen all of them.
Yeah, I've seen all of them multiple times. Just because, sometimes when my brain can't handle something that I have to put any work into, I'm just like, I'm going to put on a fucking Saw movie. And I'm just like, just because it's that aesthetic, it's like, I just want that dirty, grimy, like, twist a minute, crazy vibe. And it's kind of comforting to me. It's weird. Sometimes I wish I was trapped in a bathroom with another dude. We were both just like, chained to the wall, and we couldn't go anywhere. He couldn't go anywhere.
like, hey, do you have a box and a wall that has a cigarette in it for me?
And then I get to saw an appendage off. It's a great time. So,
Which appendage are you picking?
Yeah, I mean, overall, I would watch it again, and I enjoy these movies, at least these first few. And I think this one does a good enough job outside of not making a ton of sense with just trying to do what it sets out to do, and is make like a little gritty horror flick, and it does a good job.
Yeah, and I think that the sense is there of like what makes good like horror iconography. Like you can tell that James Wan and Leigh Whannell like were fans of the horror genre, and so like like the Billy the Puppet and even Tobin Bell's voice and the way that he presents everything on the tapes. Obviously, huge influence on 13 Reasons Why. She was basically the millennial Jigsaw in that show, but and you can even see early Giallo influences. You have like the black gloved mystery character, even Jigsaw like wearing the cloak and everything feels very Giallo, where it's like, oh, it's a mystery killer running around. A lot of that reminded me of what we would see in stuff like Malignant. So it was cool, like having watched some Giallo stuff, to go back and be like, oh, they were obviously influenced. Apparently Billy the Puppet is supposed to be a reference to Deep Red. So he was very intentionally trying to put Argento stuff into even Saw. So.
That makes sense, especially with how hyper focused like the color is in certain scenes, where it's like, this is the color of this scene.
Yeah, it's like, when you cut somewhere, it's one color, and that's it's everything. Yeah. So totally
cool.
Well,
next week we're going to continue with this, and we're going to watch Saw 2.
Yeah, and we'll just keep going until we decide we want to cut our own feet and eyes out.
Yeah, I think we're going to stop at Jigsaw. I don't think we're going to do Spiral, right? Because we already did Spiral.
We have an episode on Spiral. You can check it out if you want to. Spoiler alert, we didn't like it.
Cool. Hey, Creep Cult, welcome to your weekly Patreon bonus episode. This week we are continuing with James Wanuary, and we are talking about Saw 2.
Really rolls off the tongue, right?
Yeah.
James Wanuary, whose brilliant fucking idea was that?
I'll own up to it.
I think it's great.
Yeah. It's not the stupidest idea we've had for this show. I think
there's some classic wordplay.
We did at one point do an episode called The Shit Olympics.
Hey, also my idea.
You're just outing all your terrible ideas there, all your dirty laundry.
Aside from maybe doing Redemptions, I think all of the worst ideas we've had have been my ideas.
But they're the
think
classics.
James Wanuary is a bad idea. And the Shit Olympics, the only reason we haven't done it again is because we fucking hated watching those movies.
Yeah, we kind of decided, it's not really in our best interest to force ourselves to watch terrible horror movies.
I think if we were to do it again, it would have to be with one rule that would have to be followed, and that is that the three of us have to watch all of the movies together, and like not in one sitting, but all three of us in the same room.
I think one of the rules should be the movie has to be not shot on a potato. But that's why I have huge respect for the gals and fellas over at I Hope You Suffer podcast, because that's their whole bit, is they just do shitty horror movies. Speaking of shitty horror movies,
Hey, I disagree.
I also disagree. Yeah, I just felt like it was a good segue.
This is one of the better ones.
Let's get heated now. Lock his ankle up.
Fuck Darren Lynn Bousman.
Is that the director?
In the house, man. Yeah, that's the director of this
Great.
one.
There you go. Saw 2, directed by Darren Lynn Bousman.
Yeah, so a little bit of background on this one, like we did with Saw. So Saw, you guys don't know this, was a movie. And it was a tiny little movie.
I saw it.
that did no patience for that on this episode, okay? We're getting straight to the facts. Saw did really well. So they were like, yo, we should make another one. Well, like we discussed last week with them going, James Wan and Leigh Whannell, you guys should go make Dead Silence just in case Saw tanks. Well, because they were busy over there doing Dead Silence, there was nobody around to do Saw 2.
Did it come out the next year?
Pretty sure,
Yeah,
Okay.
2004.
And so it's a wild story around this because Darren Lynn Bousman, who up until this point had only directed music videos, he wrote a script called The Desperate. And when he tried to pitch the script, literally everybody was like, this is a Saw movie. And Saw had just come out and he didn't really know much about it, but obviously it was frustrating the hell out of him that everybody was like, this is basically a Saw movie. So he kept pitching it around, couldn't get anybody to do it. And then because they were looking for somebody to direct Saw 2, they were like, hey, if we get Juan and Winnell to come in and spruce up and retrofit your script, we can make that the second Saw movie. So
that's
Saw 2
cool.
is kind of a Cloverfield situation of let's take an already existing script and
Jazz it up.
add Jigsaw and turn it into a Saw movie. So
I would say that
I think knowing that you can
that was
tell.
better than the
but-
Cloverfield tie-ins are.
Yeah. But I do think that Saw 2 is a pretty fucking fun movie. And I think that it does some things a little bit better than the first one did.
My favorite part, right off the rip, I think, is that transition when Donnie Wahlberg's like in his apartment and then like goes into the crime scene. I was like, what the fuck just happened?
Well, you're in for
Like,
a
it
treat
blew
because
my mind.
Yeah, in the second one they start with the crazy transitions and they get more and more insane with their transitions and it becomes like a staple throughout the series. And it's one of my favorite parts because they get weird.
That one was so good. I was like, right on.
Well, and then one of my favorite things about this movie is that they pretty much immediately catch Jigsaw. And to me, that's, obviously really surprising because we talked about in the first one how it's pretty ridiculous that he hasn't been caught and how just it's the incompetence of the cops. In this one, they're just
Yeah.
like, nope, fuck it, bring in the SWAT team, and they
And
catch
correct that
him.
mistake, like we talked about last week, where it's like, well, let's overcorrect.
Yeah.
But this made sense. Like, if you're gonna catch this guy, send in a team, not you and your partner.
And then you get this whole
That ankle on the stairs, though. Can we talk about that? Ooh.
So I think that the way that they did this in the movie is better than their original idea because I guess they were going to have blades come out and chop off the guy's legs. And I think just having the step shoot out and like shatter his shins is way more brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love it. So in this one you have, oddly enough, Wahlberg. He's back.
Yeah.
But I guess
This is a much better Donnie Wahlberg than in Dead Silence.
How did they have scheduling conflicts?
that's what I'm saying. That's why I had that little like hiccup there where I was like, oddly
He's like, I
enough,
got weekends
because-
off. I'm ready.
Yeah, because he apparently, he just bounced back and forth between them. He was like, hey, this is the green movie, this is the blue movie. And so at least he's not shaving in this one, and I do think that he turns in a substantially better performance. But yeah, he, right off the bat, you see Jigsaw is a step ahead of everybody because he, in classic Joker fashion, he wanted to get caught to initiate this whole game with Eric Matthews. And so yeah, the games begin basically with Jigsaw and Matthews hanging out, watching a video feed of a bunch of people trapped in the craziest escape room. Again, just building on the escape room idea
Yeah, and you can tell this one has a bigger budget. It looks better
by about
than the
$3
first
million.
and which is almost double, right? Like, wasn't the first one 5?
So the
This
first
one
one had a $1 million budget, and this one
Oh.
had a $4 million budget.
Oh shit!
So
Okay. So yeah, a lot. That's a huge difference in, and it's not as choppy. Like, you still get the classic Saw like quick cuts and that kind of thing, but
You can
it's-
tell they shot enough film to make a film.
yeah.
And they didn't have to try to scrape shit together at the last minute to pad time.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel like it's too much ripping off. Like, I mean, I know it's a sequel, but it still seems like Three Name Guy did his best to make it kind of his own spin on it.
yeah, and they, the first one having such a small budget, obviously they, like I had mentioned that they shot pretty much that whole movie like in a warehouse.
Right.
Similar with this one, the pretty much all the sets for this movie were all built in like a series of rooms in one warehouse. So being economical.
Yeah, why not? That's probably hella easy to, like, all right, we gotta go to the set.
Yeah, and it sounds like it would be a lot of fun being on the like pre-production team for a Saw movie because they would just pitch like crazy ideas, like for the box with the blades in it that
so cool.
Addison sticks her hands into. That came out of that trap was meant for the guy who's like embezzling, who is like got arrested for embezzling money, and the whole joke was supposed to be like, oh, you've been putting your hand in the proverbial cookie jar. And that's where they started. Like, what if somebody put their hand in a jar and then they couldn't get it out? And the whole thing evolved from there. They're like, yeah, how do we make that work with chains and blades and shit? Yeah. And then hearing how they put those traps together to like make it safe for the people, you know, with rubber blades, or the needle pit, which I think is one of the most iconic traps of the entire franchise, at least to me, because it's so fucked up. It still makes me like my stomach turn every time.
And it's also specific to Amanda, even though
she's not the one who was intended for the trap. It fits her backstory.
Exactly.
Yeah. And makes it more emotionally impactful. One, because I think Shawnee Smith is great. And then also, because it ties into her backstory. But they had to go through, I think it was something like 120,000 syringes and take the needles out and put fiber optic wire in them. And then the pit still wasn't big enough and deep enough. So then they padded it with a bunch of styrofoam and shit underneath and then put all the needles on top. And at one point, some real needles ended up getting mixed in there by accident, and the crew had to meticulously go through and pull out all of the real needles before filming could start. So they were literally looking for
needles
in a needle stack. So, but I think the whole house, I think that the mystery obviously is a lot bigger in this one, because you have all of the, you know, what's the deal with all these people? How are they connected? It kind of reminds me of something like Cube, where, I mean, a lot of this reminds me of Cube. I don't know which came out first. Was it
Cube?
Cube
Cube came out in the 90s, right?
The first one, I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Yeah, so, but, you know, you find out that everybody in here is connected by Eric Matthews. They were all put into prison, jail for whatever reason, and you have the really cool aspect that his son is in the house with everybody, and I love that reveal.
I think he
Seventh Heaven finds out
evidence on all of them.
Yeah.
So they weren't even supposed to be in jail for what he convicted them for. I think that was all their connection, right?
Yeah, because he's a dirty cop, and then some of the expanded stuff, it talks about how Addison, who has hinted that she's a prostitute, she actually slept with Eric Matthews like in a cop car, and he got caught, and that's why he got demoted. And then there's a whole backstory that's not in the movie about how he had an affair with the woman detective.
Yeah, not Carrie Russell.
Yeah, not Carrie Russell. And that's why his marriage fell apart and why his son is
estranged.
It sounds like, from what Jigsaw says, it sounds like he like assaulted somebody.
Yeah, broke his nose or his arm or something.
Yeah, or jaw or something, I think. Yeah, like it sounded like he assaulted somebody.
Yeah, it's AWAB. All Wahlbergs are bastards. And so
all Wahlbergs are burgers.
So what I think that this movie does better than the first one is I think that the twist at the end of this is
two twists.
The two twists at the end of this are just executed generally better, and it feels like there's better. Yeah, and it feels like there's an actual like build up where it makes sense. Better. There's less leaps in logic, I feel, in this movie in terms of like how the twists are executed, and that may come from the fact that it existed as a script with most of these elements already before it became a Saw thing.
It made it easier to go at the end and do, you know, three twists in a pretty quick succession.
But if you look really closely, like you can guess right from the jump as soon as you see Jigsaw and Wahlberg hanging out in their like lair or whatever. There's stuff from the house like in all around in the background. If you look really closely, that hints at the fact that all the shit in the house already happened in the past. So that's all set up really nicely. And then one of my favorite lines from Jigsaw where he's like, your son is in a safe location.
Yeah.
And then the twist is he was into safe. Get it?
I mean, I think that's four twists then, because so twist one is the fact that this like escape room house thing is also attached to the original location.
Love that. Gives me the chills.
And then twist two is that it was pre-recorded footage and that this all already happened. Twist three is that Jigsaw, after he sends Wahlberg away, like still has the kid in the safe. And then twist four is that Amanda's been involved the whole time.
What about and maybe this is a twist, but another element, they got the fucking key to the trap door as soon as they were there.
Yeah,
Like,
so
it's the first thing they get. Like, that's
So just like in the first movie, their solution is there at the very beginning in the original room. So that feels like a cool expansion of what was originally in Saw. And then things like when Addison goes in and she puts her hands in the trap, if you look up in the corner of the box, there's a padlock with a key in it, and she literally could have just gone and opened the box with the key and the lock. Yeah. And it's supposed to be a subtle hint that Jigsaw knows the people that he's trapping so well that he knows they're just going to rush into this shit and they're not going to pay attention. And you see that with the first guy who goes up and turns the key and blows his fucking head off.
Or he's looking through the fucking...
through the people. Yeah, exactly. It's like he knows that these people are going to do the wrong thing, and that's why they're not going to survive.
This, I feel like, is where it kind of shifts to these way more elaborate mechanical engineering traps. I know we get a little bit in the first one with like the reverse bear trap, but for the most part, it's two dudes shackled to pipes.
Yeah.
And then a dude in just razor wire. Like, there's not any intricacy to that. He's just in a room.
Well,
like, it's not fun to get out, but for the most part, it's like kind of simple.
Yeah, Bousman talked about how when they were making this movie, they took a lot of the fan feedback from Saw into account. And so he was saying a couple of things that fans really wanted to see was more elaborate traps and not to see what happened to the people in the traps in flashbacks, but to actually see it as it's happening. Like, people didn't want all, because in the first one, it's mostly just flashbacks and then quick cuts of what happened to these people. And that's why the first one is a lot less violent, really. Kind of a Texas Chainsaw Massacre situation where you imagine that it's a lot gorier. And so I think the fans had a big, they had a big hand in why this franchise just got crazier and crazier, because after this, like, the traps get so insane, and they continue this thing of like really having this big thematic wraparound where it's like it's all connected to this one guy, and there's all these people, and it branches off, and then Amanda is double crossing everybody, and that whole thing gets like turned up to the nth degree with now there's this many Jigsaw accomplices, and they're connected to these people in this way, and
there's like a bunch of stuff happening at the same time, right? Because don't 3 and 4 take place at the same time?
I think so, yeah. And something that I think that this could have done a little bit better is I don't really feel like the traps are as closely connected to the people's lives. Like, I know some of them go into the wrong traps and get mixed up, but in the first one, like, it really feels like Jigsaw is very intentionally like,
it's
and he always has a pun
for
it. Like, it's always, and I think one of them he does is like, oh, you've burned people your whole life. Now you got to climb into this furnace.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he gets a couple of the little puns in, but I feel like these traps don't feel as tied into the people who are in the building. And I think that also may come because a lot of these traps are from the original script. Like, his script literally had traps in it. So I'm like, how did you not know that something else was already blowing up the Sundance circuit with this exact concept? But
so I do like some of the trap designs in this. I think the Iron Maiden helmet is pretty sick. Yeah,
I think they call it the Venus flytrap.
I mean, but it literally is an Iron Maiden just for your head.
Mm-hmm.
Could you do it?
Could you go behind your eye?
Rip a key out from behind my eye? I mean, I think I have like a small leg up in the fact that I wore contacts all through high school, so I can get here.
As a man who's worn contacts for almost going on 15 years at this point. Fuck that. I'm not.
I'm just taking the death.
Eye trauma is like I have intrusive thoughts about that where I'm like, what if something just like stabbed me in the eye, and I just, because obviously as an artiste, my vision is very important to me, and also as a movie lover, my vision is very important to me, and so I freak out at any eye trauma, which is why I'm a big Fulci fan.
This week I was doing something in my garage and something went in my eye, and I was like, what if this blinded me? Like, I couldn't read, I couldn't watch movies, I couldn't watch TV. I mean, that's like 3 of my loves.
And that's
couldn't do projects. Like,
that's why the trap is so creepy.
Yeah.
Because and also a cool little twist on just the regular bear trap and having to get the shit out of the dude's guts. In this, it's like, now you get to get it out of your own self. Yeah. I think that the furnace trap is cool.
Yeah.
And really hardcore. Like, to me, this movie is obviously a lot more brutal than the first one. A lot more wincing.
Surprisingly, considering it was written by somebody else and not with the intent of it being a sequel to Saw, it does do all of the sequel things where it's like, do the stuff from the first movie, but do it bigger. Mm-hmm. And I think that it succeeds at that where a lot of sequels don't.
But I think it's smart that they didn't just trap people in a room. Like, I know they're still trapped, but I think the house setting really helped that. Because you get to travel and then having, I don't know. Like, yeah, because that's a good point. It's weird to me now thinking about it. Because it is just bigger, but it does it well. Where it doesn't feel like
Yeah, that's what
they're
I'm saying.
just it's not just like, I don't know, cubey. Like, it could have been a lot more cube where it's like, let's go stuck in this room. Now we're stuck in this room. Like, they were able to kind of travel and do their own thing.
Yeah, it doesn't feel super claustrophobic. Like it still feels like there's enough changes in scenery as they're going around, and you also always have the looming, the poison that's in their system, and so people start deteriorating throughout the movie. But if you pay attention, again, the twists are telegraphed because Amanda at no point throughout the movie shows that she's sick or poisoned, and then you find out at the end that she wasn't sick or poisoned and that she was a plant. For Jigsaw, and I like that at the end she gets to do her own, Jigsaw speech and do the whole game over, and we get a repeat of the door slam on
not trapped.
Donnie Wahlberg.
So, like, what's her... Is she not Jigsaw-y? Because he's not... What she does to him doesn't fit with how Jigsaw operates. And I know it's because Amanda's different.
You're getting a little ahead of yourself, bro, because a big theme of future Saw movies is how she is not following Jigsaw's rules.
Well, then. Okay.
She's her own fucked up killer with...
I don't remember at all.
But yeah, they explore that in the future movies and a lot of other crazy things. But I like this movie, and I think these first three especially feel really cohesive, and they feel like they do a good job of like one-upping the last one without going too crazy. And then after three, I have like the movies that still kind of stand out, and the traps still kind of stand out. But these first three, I think, are like the Saw trilogy, the trilogy, and it should have ended there.
I don't think I remember much after 4. I know there's one scene, I think, in 7 where a dude gets his like face ripped off by a tire. I think the dude from Linkin Park.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's Chester. R.I.P.
Yeah. One of my, I know that we're getting way ahead of ourselves, but one of my favorites is like the Saw on like the platform with the two people who have to like they do something that convinces the Saw to go one way or the other. To like they have to like
have to butter it up. Ooh, you're such a sharp, beautiful Saw. One of my favorite ones, and I don't remember which movie it's from, but it's the one where the dude has his head like inside of the box, and it's filling with water, and he ends up having to like take out a pen and give himself a tracheotomy.
Oh my god!
To survive the trap. It's pretty.
I don't remember that at all.
Pretty intense. But yeah, that's Saw 2. I think we've talked about most of the things that are highlights of this movie. Tobin Bell is still great.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any
it's interesting
negatives?
That he in a year goes from like I'm pretty strong, I got blade sleeves, and I'm good to like on basically dying.
I mean, that's cancer for you.
Yeah, I don't know. I just was like, whoa, shit, you're all right.
It's like Breaking Bad. He's like, oh, I'm so sick with cancer. And then for 4 seasons, he's like, oh, I kind of have cancer. And then in the end, he's like, oh, damn, the cancer's back.
Oh, I got so much cancer, dude. Fucking hell of cancer, bro.
That's pretty funny.
Do we have any negatives? I'll start. I'm not the biggest fan of fucking Tattoo Guy.
Tattoo guy?
The-
Opie or something?
The buff one who's walking.
The one who cuts all the numbers off.
Yeah.
That shit was tight too. I loved that.
I like the scene where he cuts his own number off was pretty sick.
Yeah, because I love when they're like,
the
oh,
character that much.
when Amanda's like, yeah, nobody's going to read your number, so you're fucked. And he's just like, da-na-na, da-na-na.
But I like that idea too. Like the numbers are on the back of your mind.
Follow the rainbow.
Smart.
Taste the
Smart
rainbow.
stuff.
Yeah, it's just like none of it's super crazy complex, but you still feel kind of like, ooh, that was cool when you find out what, and it's all in the wordplay. I feel like if you got like an English major in there and they were just all about that wordplay, they would just solve the puzzle immediately. Like I want to see that situation where he sets up this huge elaborate puzzle and somebody does the right thing for once and is just like, oh, here's the key, opens the door, walks out. Damn,
Son of a bitch, he's good.
Especially like Amanda starts exploring the bricks and then they don't search the room. I'm like, dude, have you ever seen an escape room?
Well, and then
search everything.
Yeah, and then I was like, okay, I guess like the best way to fudge over if anybody could have done things a little bit smarter or easier, you could just be like, well, Amanda's there specifically to kind of keep them away from things that would make them solve it too easily.
Yeah.
I don't know how obvious that is in the movie.
I don't think so.
But
I don't know.
Yeah. I'm like, well, you could always wipe it away that way.
I don't really have too much negatives. I mean, not all the performances are great, but it's a Saw movie, so.
I mean, I think that they're all better than what we get from Ellis and Winnell in the first one.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. By a mile. Yeah, I mean, yeah, putting it in the realm of Saw, my bigger complaints I don't think are going to come until those later movies, because I have a blast with these first three and I don't have a ton of complaints. Like, yeah, they're not, cinema verite. They're not fine art, but they're fun and they're fucked up, and I like the traps. And yeah, that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say about that.
Anything else you want to add, John?
No, like I said, I had a good time with this one. I'm excited for 3. Still.
John Saw.
Do you think that you guys like 2 better than 1? Because I feel
Yeah,
like I'm
I
starting
think
to
I
be
do.
in that camp. Like, if it
I
wasn't
think I do.
Juan, I probably would immediately say it. But since I'm
Am I a
like,
bigger
since
fan
we're-
of 1 or 2?
Yeah.
I think I enjoy the concept of 2 better, but I think that 1 is a wholly original thing,
Yeah.
and I think that it gets street cred for that.
Yeah, and I think that's the exact opinion that most reviewers had when this came out, which was it's still fun, but that first one was so fresh and interesting when it came out and had such a cool new concept outside of, heavily being influenced by 7.
Right.
That people were just like blown away by that, and then progressed as each of the movies kind of just was like copy, paste, make a few changes to the homework. People were less like enthused about the whole bit, but I mean, I think I have more fun with this movie than if I want to just put on I'm just going to put on a Saw movie to have fun with, it would be this one or one of the later ones where the plot is just like not super important, but it's just fun to see a bunch of people wander around and get into fucked up situations. Because in the first one, you do just spend a lot of time just in that bathroom with the 2 of them, and if you're kind of zoned out and you're not paying attention, like there's not a lot going on in that movie, and the traps don't take up a ton of time, so it's like I think it's a better, more fresh movie, but I have more fun with the sequels.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I think that at least these couple have a plot. Like, doesn't the plot get pretty thin going forward, where it's like not really about the plot anymore? It's just about dying.
It just gets more and more convoluted. But I saw somebody on Twitter today say that they rewatched the whole series and that they had this like magical moment of clarity where they were like, oh my God, this isn't convoluted. It all makes sense. It's brilliant. And I was like, we'll see when we get to the end of
I
these
hope so.
movies.
Yeah.
If
I'm gonna say a hard
Hold on.
yeah.
Well, Bousman, obviously, the studio felt that Bousman did a good enough job because he directed 3, 4, and then Spiral.
Oh shit! Really?
Yeah.
Spiral.
Came back for Spiral.
Poor guy.
That's why everybody was
Spiral.
excited about Spiral. Your faith was misplaced.
Your faith in your friends is yours.
Anyway, we good?
Yeah.
All right.
Join the Creep Cult. $5 a month at patreon.com/Porcelain Peak for exclusive content, merch discounts, and more. Join the Creep Cult. $5 a month at patreon.com/Porcelain Peak for exclusive content, merch discounts, and more.
Welcome back, Creep Cult. You spent your life paying us.
And frankly, we want you to keep doing that.
$5 a month, and we appreciate it. So we're gonna keep talking about Saw 3.
Yeah, only so long you can do that voice.
yours.
No,
Yeah.
no, just live.
What I do like about these movies so far is that all of the taglines that I remember being on the posters are just lines that Jigsaw says in the movie, and I always like that because it's close enough to them saying the title of the movie in the movie. This is some kind of Saw 3. But yeah, we're talking.
It's like the end of one sentence and the beginning of another.
What are we?
He's like,
Some kind of Saw 3?
What's the tagline for this one? 'Cause one of them is "There will be blood." Is that 2? Oh yes, there will be blood. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Let's look it up. Let's find out what the tagline of Saw 3 is. But in the meantime,
Yeah.
why don't you give the fans, the listeners here, a little rundown of what this movie's about? For those who haven't seen it.
Well, this movie, we see Jigsaw doing some traps that might be inescapable. And we're like, what the heck's going on? And one of the, I guess, consistent characters from the last couple now dies, kind of lamely. I mean, it's cool, but we get, I don't know, it's like they don't want to have any character development outside Jigsaw.
So
It's like we could have gotten it with Eric Matthews, or we could have gotten it with
Eric Matthews.
not Kerry Russell. And then they're like, nah, let's just kill him. It's like, all right, cool. But this one follows a doctor trying to save Jigsaw's life in partnership with Amanda while his final test for somebody else is going on. He just wants to stay alive to witness what happens with that.
Or so we're led to believe.
Correct, yes. And so we kind of have two separate stories, and we see how those interact later on. So that's kind of the basic premise of Saw 3.
Yeah, the main tagline for this was suffering. You haven't seen anything yet. So people who are in this movie, Shawnee Smith returns for the final time, maybe? Who knows?
You never know with these.
We have Bahar Sumek as Lynn Denlin, the doctor that you mentioned earlier. Tobin Bell, of course, returning once again. We have Angus McFadden as Jeff, the man who is being put through his own series of saw traps in a way. We have the return of Donnie Wahlberg. We
Briefly.
have Dina Meyer as Allison Carey, and then some other people who don't really matter too much. But yeah,
And that's
so
the detective, right?
huh?
Allison Carey.
Yeah.
Okay.
So something that you mentioned, we talk a lot about like continuity in franchises and how Scream is obviously like top tier example of continuity in a franchise, or even something like Child's Play. I think Saw is pretty good with it, even if they don't. Like they're actually really good at it, especially if once you start getting into like the fourth and the fifth and those movies, like the characters who, like there'll be detectives in the first one that show up in the second one, then people from the second one that move into the third one, and then small people in this movie, like we get a certain Detective Hoffman who shows up for like 2 minutes in this movie and goes on to be a major pivotal player in future movies. Carried over for a couple movies. So they do try to, and then Lyric Bent's character, I think Riggs, he's in all of the movies, and then in the next one is like the main character. So they do try to maintain some sort of like character continuity between these. It's just that they're not characters. They're just people whose names you may or may not know, and they've shown up in the background, and it's like, okay, for this one we'll make them the main character because we've killed off everybody else. They basically just have to keep introducing a character in this movie so they can kill off all the main people and then have that character continue on into the next one, and that's kind of the formula.
Yeah.
But what do you guys think about this movie? Because I will say right off the bat that I think that this might be my favorite of the three, which may seem crazy, but I'm a big fan of Saw 3. I like this movie a lot. It's not without its problems, obviously, but that's the case with all three of these movies. And
my biggest problem with it is something that you said earlier, where it's like Jigsaw is a hypocrite, especially in this one, where he's setting people in traps that don't have a chance to escape. So his whole thing is like, you can't escape, you can't survive this, but now he's putting it in the lives of other people's hands. And if that person doesn't react, then he technically murdered those people. So he's a murderer in this, and then gets mad at Amanda for being a murderer.
So you're saying that the traps in this one,
they're not for the other person. It's like, so the girl that freezes, she has no control over that.
mm-hmm.
So she's put in a trap to die.
Yeah,
Which is different than what we've had. They're putting traps to learn a lesson and escape. But now he's putting it in somebody else's hands, which to me is not what he was originally setting out to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think in terms of the traps, they pretty much since the first one have progressively like just taken steps further and further away from being like the core concept of what Jigsaw was all about. And the more they add to like his accomplices and his motivations and stuff, the less it makes sense that what he's doing could even make sense in his own mind.
Yeah.
Like, how is he rationalizing it outside of, and the whole thing, like even Tobin Bell says it is like, Jigsaw's always got a plan. Like he's always like, he knows what he's doing. And I'm like, does he though? Or is he just fucking insane? And like, that's, everybody's like, oh no, he's just like a mastermind or whatever. And it's like, I mean, his shit really, when you think about it a little bit, doesn't make a ton of sense. And then also like again, like I said, I really like this movie, and I think the reason I'll get to in a little bit is just a lot of like, there still is a lot of emotional stuff going on in this movie,
Totally.
and it's kind of I think it's the most emotional of the three movies, and it's the last time we really get that, because after this, Winnell and Juan leave the franchise, like outside of being executive producers, they leave it completely. Winnell wrote this one with Juan, like they collaborated on writing this one and kind of shepherded these three movies. So I think these three movies, to me, are like where the real Saw franchise as like a good trilogy ends. And I think this is a good wrap up. They even do at the end of this movie like let's flash back through all of the movies and show all the things and do like a big recap of what's happened in these previous three movies. And then after this, it just completely loses the plot. And like I said in text, like it, goes into orbit. and just doesn't make any fucking sense anymore. But
How do you feel about it?
I mean, I feel like it tells a complete story, which I think is interesting. I like that it takes the core concept of kind of how they ran things in Saw 2 and simplifies it. Removes some of the stripped away, like strips away some of like the overcomplicated parts of Saw 2 that make it a little more difficult to follow, because there's all these spinning plates inside of the house, and then there's also the storyline that's going on the outside. For the most part, it's just the stuff that's going on inside and the stuff that's going on in the hospital bed, and that's it. And I think that is it really makes it easier to digest what's happening, whether or not things are, you know, on brand necessarily is a different story. I feel like there's a delusion there, either within Jigsaw or there's other things that are happening. Like I said, I think that there's a good chance that some of the things that have been going on have all been orchestrated by Amanda, which at that point makes more sense that they aren't, you know, winnable traps, because he gives her that argument.
Yeah, that was kind of my understanding in this movie, is that by this point, pretty much everything that's going on in terms of the traps, it's not like Jigsaw could have set these up. He's dying. He's dying in a hospital bed. So really, Amanda's been shepherding all of this, as far as we know, has been shepherding all of this stuff. And so it makes more sense to me why it wouldn't feel the same as Jigsaw. And they even point that out at parts where it's like this, and then in the future movies where it's like, oh, this doesn't really match the Jigsaw MO. And they kind of like try to confront this and that. Confront that in this movie. Sorry, guys. And so to me, that makes sense. But I do like that the stories are pretty simple, and then they eventually, I do love how they connect in the end, and I think it makes for like a really emotionally devastating conclusion to the movie. And it also is a twist without being like, oh, like just a twist for the sake of being a twist. It is like, oh, okay, like to me, it all makes sense. And also, I think going from the very first Saw movie, don't think that anything about Jigsaw really makes any real world logical sense. So I threw that out the window in the first movie.
Yeah.
Like, I've never been under the pretense that he is not a delusional madman who is just, and it gets progressively crazier. But yeah, I've never been like, you know, he's kind of got a point. I'm like, no, this guy's fucking crazy.
People think that.
Yeah, and they're wrong. But it's, you know, I just don't think that the characters who oppose him are given enough time to like make any sound, solid arguments or be compelling characters who are going up against him. They're just like,
totally.
oh, we're
the
just
stuff that he picks is like everybody does something wrong in his eyes. Like, I'm sure there's stuff that all of us like don't appreciate about our lives. You know what I mean? So it's like you can pick anybody.
Well, and that's where it comes down to what I really meant about like, this is where you start to really see that he's a hypocrite, because the entire basis of why he puts Jeff through all of this, all of his traps and everything is, you know, I want you to get over the rage and lust for revenge that you have about the dude who killed your son in the drunk driving accident. And it's like, but what are you?
Yeah.
It's like, what have you been doing, Jigsaw, this entire time? And, you know, not to get too ahead of ourselves, but like the more they add in the future movies about why he does what he does, and they do add a lot more, it is about revenge. He specifically picks his first victims of people who have like wronged him personally, and that's how he kind of starts off. And I'm like, well, then you're just fucking, like, you're punishing people for exactly the same thing that you're doing. And that's where I'm like, okay, yeah, I got to put it out of my head that what Jigsaw is doing makes any sort of like logical, moral sense. He's not this like savior that he thinks. And Amanda kind of tries to call him out on it at the end of this movie. She's like, they're just bad people and I want to fucking kill them. Like, this whole rodeo that you're going through, like, it doesn't make any sense, and it's not helping people, and they're not going to be saved. It's like, why would you think that putting somebody in some sort of deadly crazy trap is going to like suddenly make them have this crazy epiphany? It's like, just because it happened for you in your car accident or whatever, like, doesn't mean that it applies to everybody. Like, it makes it, yeah. And she tries to call him out on it, and
she's also she's the perfect example, because she then becomes a murderer. Like, she goes through this whole process, like, she lives her life, you know, not caring about her life, you know, doing drugs and all these things, and then, you know, after she goes through this, you know, this Jigsaw trial, she is now in a place where she has access to all of these tools, and she takes advantage of them. She's not attempting to try to help right wrongs. She's just now like, oh, these people don't care about their lives, so let's kill them. And I think that it just goes to show that what he's accomplishing is creating killers. He's not, creating people who are going to care about their lives all of a sudden. It's now you creating the thing that he didn't want to create in the first place.
Yeah, and she has that line where she's like, you think what you're doing is right or whatever, like fix me. Like you never fixed me. Like you promised that you would, and I'm still cutting myself and doing all these all the stuff that I was doing in the beginning, and nothing's changed except I've become a worse human being. Like I've become a shittier person, and I assume that was the intention, was to kind of delve a little bit more into like, okay, picking apart what Jigsaw is doing and kind of realizing that it's hard too, because I'm just trying to kind of keep these three movies as a separate thing, because to me, like, the ending of this movie kind of feels like the defeat of not just Jigsaw as a person, but also the idea of Jigsaw. Like, it feels like both of those things die in this movie. You finally get to a point where you're like, okay, nothing about what he's doing has really helped anybody, and it's destroyed his life, it's destroyed her life, it's destroyed these people's lives. It's really helped no one, and at the end, he kind of just, dies fucked up in a hospital bed, getting his throat slashed open by a circular saw.
With a smile on his face. That was so cool.
Yeah, and
So
even then,
like
he's not willing to give
evil.
up the thing. He's fucking putting a tape and wax for, future plots or whatever, and it's just like, this dude doesn't know when to give up.
I like the surrogate father thing going on with him and Amanda. I thought that was interesting, and I mean, I know that's not what these movies are about, but if they would have tried to dive into that a little bit more, I think
That's
that
what this movie
really
is
cool.
supposed to be about. That's what Winnell and Juan said that they wanted to do, was do like a fucked up father-daughter story with Jigsaw and Amanda.
You can see hints of it.
Yeah, and so originally this movie, nobody involved had any intention to make this movie. They made the second one, and Darren Lynn Bousman and Winnell and Juan, basically everybody was like, yeah, we're out, we're done after the second one. And then Greg Hoffman, the producer of the first two, passed away very young, and pretty soon after the second one came out, and so they were like, well, we should make a third one in his memory. And so that was part of why they wanted to make this a more emotional story, and where the Hoffman character, the Detective Hoffman character who becomes bigger in later movies, gets his name, is from that producer. But yeah, they were like, we kind of just wanted to give it a more emotional conclusion, and I think that's just what resonates with me more. But yeah, I the traps in this one, they don't do a whole lot for me. I mean,
it's not as good as the previous movie. The traps in that movie, with all the additional moving parts, they felt more personalized, whereas the traps that were given to these other people who were part of this case where this person's son died just don't have any attachment to those people. And I think part of that is because they're not like by the mastermind necessarily. But I also think that when you tie it all together at the end, it's you're supposed to have this like tenuous grasp of the fact that in reality this whole thing was a test for Amanda to make sure that she was doing things the Jigsaw way, the right way. But then when she failed, the entire intent of that was actually a final test for the dude coming in about the shit with his son, and him, forgiving, for when people are killed or whatever. And then so all of these things had to go wrong for this end result. And it's supposed to make it seem like he's like pulling all the strings, and it doesn't feel like that when you get to the end. It just feels like it all just kind of like a comedy of errors to get to this point.
Yeah, and I it's like we once again are getting like the twists inside of twists, like you talked about with Saw 2. But yeah, in this one, and Winnell and Juan said that like they pretty much wanted you to have guessed from the very beginning that Jeff and is it Lynn, or the doctor, were married. And and they do a good job of, because they were like, we didn't really want it to be like a huge twist, but we just wanted it when it finally got to the point where the two storylines met. Obviously it's really fucked up, like, all these tensions have reached a point where it's just like, this is going to end badly for everyone, and it does. Heads explode and people get shot, and it's crazy. But this is where I think the suspension of disbelief finally gets stretched to the point where like it's gonna snap soon with how complicated all this stuff gets. Like you were saying, like it really makes no sense that his Rube Goldberg would have all of the possible steps by everybody like taken into account to the point where he's like, oh, don't worry, like this is all exactly the way that I wanted it to happen. And then the traps have also become so complicated that it starts getting ridiculous. Like the pig thing, like the dropping the pig carcasses into the grinder and then having that pour out on the guy, and then in order for him to get the guy out, he has to burn his kids things. Or like even the woman where it's like, we strung her up naked and then we put her in a freezer and then we have water spraying on her, and it just all
I thought that was cool.
I mean, it is cool. I mean, it's visually very cool. It reminded me of obviously of something like
Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th, like Jason X, or House of Wax, the remake, where when I think it's Jared Padalecki gets like waxed up and then they peel part of his face off. So cool visually, but yeah, just very complicated. And again, like you said, they don't feel like they're personally, or maybe you said it, don't feel like they're personally attached. The whole like angel thing where she has to dip her hand in the fucking acid to get the key.
Yeah, that was really irritating
it's gnarly,
because there was so much loose chain that I was like, tip it over.
I think she like
if
tries,
it's down,
but
then just lift it up. Like, yeah, but I was like, that doesn't make sense.
Well, and then my biggest
You lost me there.
biggest peeve with all of these traps is that he fails to save any of these people, even though his intention eventually is to save each and every one of them. And it's all like every trap that he goes into, it's the same deal. He sees the person, he hesitates for fucking forever because he has to like wait. Oh, do I do this? I think after the first one, you would just be like, okay, I'm gonna get all these people. Like, I get it. I'm gonna start getting these people out of these traps.
I don't know. I mean, that guy was pretty far down the rabbit hole into depression and anger and everything. So you never know.
Yeah, it started to feel a little bit repetitive by the time he gets to the final one with the dude, which is
it's
very
gruesome.
Fucked up, gruesome trap, like the crucifix thing twisting him up. But yeah, like at the end, I'm like, you're not gonna get any of these people out because you're just gonna stand around and
Right, and they needed Jeff to be alone at the very end, so when he does save the guy eventually, then they just have him get shot in the next room with some random shotgun.
Yeah, just gotta get him out of the movie.
Pretty much. So that sucks.
But highlights, I still think that Shawnee Smith is
She's
one of the best parts
yeah.
of this franchise in the movies that she's in. And I think she's the best in this one that she's been out of the three of them. You really feel like she's a real character that you've actually gotten some growth out of, like the only one. Because Jigsaw pretty much stayed, as much as they try to inject backstory into him, I honestly feel like he works better when you know very little about why he does what he does. Because again, the more you add, the more it breaks apart why it makes any sense. But him, not a ton of character growth, and then most of the main characters in these movies get killed off in the movie that they're in, or they disappear to like surprise reappear later on. But we didn't even really talk about the way this movie opens, which is fucking brutal.
I sent a text message. I was like, God damn! They have a Wahlberg, Eric Matthews, fucking smash his leg apart, so that way he can get it out of the chains.
Yeah, way smarter.
But still, fucking.
You would think a doctor would have known to do that.
Oh, Gordon, yeah. So yeah, that's brutal, and also I love when a movie, and this is what I was saying about Insidious too, where it's like it pretty much picks up right after the events of the previous movie. So imagine, I didn't see these in theaters, but I can only imagine being like a big Saw fan, getting to the cliffhanger of Saw 2, and then going into this one a year later and being like, oh fuck yeah, we're immediately getting back into it and figuring out what happened to his character. Not great. He is just Wahlberg's just. He's been put through the ringer, and whenever he's in a Juan related project, getting his tongue ripped out, getting his son stuffed into a safe.
He turned his leg into a Wahlburger.
Yeah. Well,
when
and then
he's
also,
like walking on it, and then it goes.
Oh, and then when she fucking kicks it when she's fighting him. Oh man, hate stuff like that.
So yeah, to me that's worse than him just cutting it off.
So I understood when he was just like, you bitch. And I love when he's like, you're not Jigsaw, bitch. Yeah. And that like triggers her. She's like, oh, motherfucker, I'm going to come back and get you.
I might be Jigsaw.
Maybe.
Also, we get Winnell back in this movie for a little bit.
His corpse? Or, well, I guess it's setting up the room.
A flashback with
it's setting up the room,
him
right?
and Amanda, right?
Yeah, there's the flashback where
Yeah.
we see what happened to him. She went in there and like Mercy killed him after he got stuck in the room, like put the bag over his head.
Right.
Yeah, suffocated him. So him and Wahlberg, I guess, both kept it super under wraps that they were involved in the movie at all. Like Wahlberg didn't do any press, he denied, put out a publicity statement saying that he wasn't involved in the movie or anything, just that it would be obviously a surprise that
And it also wouldn't
he was coming back.
suck if you came for those two, either of those two characters, and then have them for the short amount of time you get either of them for.
Yeah.
Made sense for Winnell though, because I guess he was just on the set pretty much the entire time they were doing this movie, just to make sure that everything went according to his and Juan's plan for it. So he probably was just like, well, I'm here, might as well just show what happened to my character.
Did they say why the movie didn't become that like father-daughter story that they wanted it to? Was it studio interference, or is it just more for they just didn't end up writing it?
Not from what I read. I think it's probably just because by this point they talk a lot about. Well, Bousman talks a lot about how the fan boards had really popped up around this time of like people getting really into Saw and pitching ideas and things they wanted to see. And so these movies, I think, start to feel more and more like just fan service for the fans who want to see more crazy traps, more convoluted plot, more all this. And it's like, really, if they had been able to streamline it to just like the father-daughter story without having to service the people who are like coming back, another Halloween for some gruesome fucked up stuff. Like, did we really need to see the entire like dude ripping it's gnarly, but the dude ripping the, shit out of himself in the school or whatever. That's the dude I was saying. He's the Danzig ghost from Insidious.
Is it really?
Yeah, same actor.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, it's like we don't really need to see that stuff. We could have focused more on the character stuff, but it's a Saw movie, so outside of that first one, I don't think they really had as much control over how much gratuitous trapping was going to be happening.
Fair enough. Yeah, I still enjoy it, and I'm wondering how much that's going to last as these carry on.
Yeah, I texted you guys last night and said, buckle up, because 4 immediately takes like a Wile E. Coyote nosedive off a cliff. And if you're buckled in for the ride and you're into it, like I said, I enjoy this franchise, but I don't have any qualms about saying that they're not good movies. Like, I don't even think that these first 3 Saw movies are great movies. I just really enjoy them, especially since like they continue to just lean into like that very specific Saw style, and it just keeps up until you get to like Saw 3D or Jigsaw or whatever, like where they just ditch that style and start doing weird different shit. They stay pretty close to like, it's all green and grungy and dirty, and we gotta always go back to the bathroom for some reason. I guess in this movie they used the recreated bathroom from Scary Movie 4.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so the Scary Movie 4 people were parodying Saw, and they had built a replica of the bathroom, which they were just like, hey, is it cool if we use that for Saw 3 for the bathroom? Since he did such a great recreation, like, why not save the time and the money?
That's fantastic.
So they just used it, and I'm like, that's cool.
That's a
I
neat
like
little
that.
Easter egg, yeah.
Yeah.
Just shows you how good those Scary Movie movies are,
I mean, we're on record. They were pretty rough.
You're like, maybe these are
first
forgotten
one.
gems, and then we watched the first one, we're like, no, thank you.
No, they were not. Yikes!
But yeah, kind of crazy to think that we're not even halfway through.
Not even halfway there.
James January is going to be a long one.
For the patrons, yeah. For everybody else,
It's almost over. What a bummer.
but yeah, let us know. I know Carlos reached out to us on Instagram recently and said that the Saw franchise is probably his all-time favorite horror franchise. So I wouldn't go that far, but people are very passionate about it. And yeah, if you guys listening, you guy, you gal, whoever's listening, have your thoughts on which of these 3 movies so far, how they rank, what your order is. For me, I would say like 1 and 3 are kind of swimming around each other up here, and then 2's like right underneath, and then the rest are way down here. Yeah.
I think that so far 2 has been my favorite.
There's something for everybody in these Saw movies. Sometimes you want your house traps. Sometimes you want your
I love movies about house traps.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where I'm at. I think that I like all 3 of them for different reasons, and they all have different problems that are like they somehow like cover up some of the problems from the previous movie and then have more different problems in the next movie.
That's honestly why going into something like Spiral, I was like, this isn't going to be a good movie. I want to see how this does the classic Saw. How is this not going to make sense? How is this going to be really overly convoluted? How is this going to, and honestly, it's really not as bad as a lot of the worst ones in this franchise in terms of all those things. But yeah. But yeah, those are our thoughts on Saw 3. We'll be back for 4, 5, 6. 3D Jigsaw.
Yep.
So
stay tuned. Yeah, we'll see you next week.
Game over.
Keep it creepy.